Welcome friends to Book Corner, my program on book reviews. Today I have for you a title named The DEOLIWALLAHS, the true story of the 1962 Chinese-Indian Internment by Joy Ma and Dilip Souza. Friends, this book was first published in 2020 by Macmillan. The price of the book is rupees 650. A compliment at the bottom of the cover page of the book by Pratap Mehta, an Indian political scientist, states, "Humanly compelling, beautifully told, brings to light a forgotten chapter of Indian history, one we need to remember in these troubled times." The title is an untold account of the internment of some 3,000 Chinese Indians after the 1962 Sino-Indian War. After a long preface, the story starts with the chapter titled Origin. It explains where these Chinese Indians came from. The Chinese presence in India in Achipur and Calcutta to start with, and later in other parts of the country, had slowly expanded for nearly 200 years after Atchew's arrival. Now, Atchew is the first ancestor of the Chinese in India. The book is a mid-sized narration of fewer than 200 pages divided into 17 chapters. In Chinese, they refer to DEOLI camp as Chap Chung Ying or Chi Chang Yin, which translates into a gathered together camp or a concentration camp. Please note that the DEOLI camp was also used for Indian political prisoners and for prisoners of war during World War II. Just after the Sino-Indian War of 1962, about 3,000 Chinese Indians were sent to languish in a disused World War II POW camp, that is, a prisoner of war camp in DEOLI in Rajasthan, making the beginning of a painful 5-year-long internment without resolution. At the time of war with China, these Chinese-looking people had fallen prey to government suspicion and paranoia, which soon seeped into the public consciousness just because their features were Chinese. This is a page of Indian history that comes wrapped in prejudice and fear and is today largely forgotten. But over 5 decades on, survivors of the internment are finally starting to tell their stories. So, is there an apology due by the government of India to them? Is the point in question. The DEOLIWALLAHS record these untold stories through extensive interviews with survivors of the DEOLI internment. Through these accounts, the book not only discovers a crucial chapter in our history, but also documents the first time how the Chinese came to be in India, how they made this country their home and became a significant community. Until the war of 1962 that brought on a terrible incarceration, displacement and tragedy. The narration is primarily constructed by the Chinese Indian community who open their hearts and minds to the authors. The Chinese Indians were considered spies around those times of the Indo-China conflict. I know it for sure because I lived in Shillong then and my father was a minister in the Assam cabinet. And now my observations about the book. The narration could have been more pointed. There is that frequent dilution of focus from the main theme by getting into very minute details and storytelling of individuals in several chapters. The language is by and large plain and simple, which is good. The book moves by the inches. I mean, it is a slow-moving book. I found the chapter title, A Contested Line, to be very interesting and informative. It gives a good open view of why the Chinese conflict took place. After the Indian Chinese were released from the prison, they had a long struggle to rebuild their lives. Some stayed back in India, some left for greener pastures abroad. And not many would know that even a ship had docked at Madras port to take the internees from DEOLI to China, the ones who were willing to go. The book is an interesting mix of the China conflict and DEOLI's internment in the 5th chapter, titled War. But was there any sense in adding this chapter to the narration? Because to me, it diluted the agonizing story of those interned at the DEOLI camp. However, the chapter titled War does raise the Indian flag when it describes the Rezangla Ridge, the scene of the fierce battle that is still remembered in India as the lone glorious chapter in the otherwise depressing story of the 1962 war. The continuity of the story is broken by the chapter titled War. The book has some illustrating pictures of the Deoli barracks. The book lacks the flourish of emotions considering what the families of the protagonists underwent. The authors could have definitely generated more emotions and sympathies of the protagonists in the narration. The narration of the main plot is not a continuous happening in the book. It is in staccato bursts, so I find it to be a disjointed book and disconnected chapters not sequencing seamlessly. But the historic facts remain interesting. The chapters don't sequence properly, I guess because of certain major chapters in between that override the main plot, but then they are very informative. The plot reveals that the Indian government's reaction towards the Chinese Indian was not soft due to their being treated as spies. The book could have been more focused on the primary theme. The authors compared the Deoli prison camp with the Manzanar prison camp in the US, where American Japanese prisoners were housed. The title requests the government of India for a Chinese Indian memorial. The majority of the Japanese internees remained in the US after their release, whereas a majority of the Chinese internees left India to start a new life in other countries. Towards the end, the book emanates holistic emotions. As a reader, I felt narration should have been more along the central theme of the book than deviating from it off and on, or the sequencing of the chapters could have been different when the authors had a meaty story to tell. Of course, the book was more like a personal account of several families. Buried inside the Himalayan blunder of 1962, the humiliating India-China war is a tragic story that is not known to most of India and is quietly ignored by successive governments. Friends, did you know that Deoli in Rajasthan had an internment camp during World War II? Starting in 1931, the British used to detain various leaders of the burgeoning Indian freedom struggle. 500 freedom fighters from Bengal to begin with, and then in the 1940s, Jayaprakash Narayan, S.A. Dange, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Jawaharlal Nehru, B.T. Ranadive, S.S. Batliwala, S.D. Patkar, and many others were detained here. In the National Archives in New Delhi, there are petitions from the wives of some of these men asking for a maintenance allowance during their husbands' incarceration or for their travel expenses to meet their husbands to be reimbursed. The British, not surprisingly, rejected them all. What I liked about the book was the initiative of the authors to have woven a book around the happenings of the Indo-China conflict, which otherwise was unknown to Indians, especially when it affected a minuscule of Chinese Indian population. I would give the book a rating of A. And that's all I have for today, friends. Goodbye and see you on my next program.